She's the Research and Analysis Manager at the polling company More in Common. We're also joined this afternoon by Dominic Selwood, historian and author of Anatomy of a Nation, a history of British identity in 50 documents. Mr. Selwood, thank you very much indeed for being on the programme today. I mean, this survey does show that attitudes are hardening year on year, and that is going to pose a real problem in 2026 for Keir Starmer as he attempts to kind of make good on that pledge that he made to win the fight for the soul of the nation.
Hello, Simon. Well, thanks very much. I think the first thing about this that strikes me is there are two very different concepts here. One is the passport test. What do you have to do to get a British passport, right? And there are some very strict rules around having a British parent or a settled parent, where you're born and so on, or naturalisation, right? We're not talking about that here. What this is a social idea, an attitude of what Britishness is, or what it means to be British. And I think it's quite important to realise that those are two very different things. And when Keir Starmer speaks about the soul of the country, as a historian, I'm really fascinated by that because, you know, Britishness only really comes into being really after the union with Scotland. So if we look through the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, what do people say when they talk about Britishness? Well, it's very much not an ethno-nationalist conversation. So, for example, the Times in the 1850s runs two very, very important articles, and it says that Britain is the asylum of nations. We are the place, and we will defend it to the last drop of our blood and the last ounce of our treasure, where we are incredibly proud to receive anybody who needs a home. And then a few years later, it says that from our ancient fusion of all these different races, we're able to sympathise with all the tribes of humanity. That's not something I would expect a politician to say today, but it was very much the feeling, you know, during the period of empire. And we see that 100 years later, in the 1950s, Churchill's Minister for Colonial Affairs, a guy called Henry Hopkinson, he stood up in Parliament in the 1950s and he said, our idea of Britishness is that anyone from throughout the empire, the dominions, what later became the Commonwealth, as long as they satisfy the status test of being a subject of the crown, which they all do in the empire, can move anywhere within that empire and can proudly say, civis Britannicus sum, I am a British citizen. So where we've got to today really is a huge shift where I think pretty much for the first time in history, we now have a group of people who quite seriously are trying to put forward an ethno-nationalist view of Britishness, which really is quite alien to the concept of Britishness since it first began.
And when you look at the sweep of history that you have examined, is this trend something that can turn? Can the pendulum swing back, or is there something now inevitable about the trajectory that the country appears to be on?
History shows these things do turn. I mean, in medieval times, we had the massacre of all Viking people when people got upset about that. But what actually we see is that the vast sweep of Britain's history, let's go really all the way back, through Celtic, Roman, Viking, Anglo-Saxon, Norman, French, then Tudor times, the arrival of Asian people from Africa, then under the Empire and so on. It is a phenomenal melting pot and always has been. The idea that Britain's multiculturalism is something new is just not historically accurate. There wasn't this golden period in the sort of mid-20th century when Britain was not ethnically mixed. Its entire history is deeply ethnically mixed. So yes, I think it changes. I think we are at a particular moment now where a lot of different pressures, including economic and also just the social lack of cohesion as we try to find our identity after centuries of empire, is creating lots of these stresses. But it's not permanent.